Chapter 8. The Discourse on Lovingkindness. What should be done by one who's skilled in wholesomeness to gain the state of peacefulness is this. One must be able, upright, straight, and not proud, easy to speak to, mild, and well content, easily satisfied and not caught up in too much bustle, and frugal in one's ways, with senses calmed, intelligent, not bold, not being covetous when with other folk, abstaining from the ways that wise ones blame, and this the thought that one should always hold. May beings all live happily and safely, and may their hearts rejoice within themselves, whatever there may be with the breath of life, whether they be frail or very strong, without exception. May they be long or short, or middle-sized, or be they big or small, or thick or visible or invisible, or whether they dwell far or they dwell near. Those that are here, those seeking to exist, may beings all rejoice within themselves. Let no one bring about another's ruin, and not despise in any way or place. Let them not wish each other any ill, from provocation or from enmity. Just as a mother, at the risk of life, loves and protects her child, her only child, so one should cultivate this boundless love to all that live in the whole universe, extending from a consciousness sublime, upward and downward and across the world, untroubled, free from hate and enmity. And while one stands and while one walks and sits or lies down, still free from drowsiness, one should be intent on this mindfulness. This is divine abiding here, they say. But when one lives quite free from any view, is virtuous with perfect insight won, and greed for sensual desires expelled, one surely comes no more to any womb. One surely comes no more to any womb. The Buddha's words. Sutta Nipata. If we stand too close to a mirror, we can't see anything. If we stand too far, we can't see anything either. We need to have just the right distance so that we can discern what we see. The loving-kindness discourse is close to many of us. We know that it means we should love everybody. That's very true, especially those people who are troublesome for us and those who don't comply with our wishes or our expectations. Let's take a closer look at the loving-kindness discourse if we're too far away from it, or take a step back from just knowing the words to see what it really says and means. It begins with, what should be done by one who's skilled in wholesomeness? That is an interesting statement because it explains wholesomeness as a skill, and skills can be learned. We have all learned skills. Talking is a skill. Even walking is a skill. We had to learn them when we were very small, and now we do fairly well after all these years. Meditation is a skill and can be learned, and is being learned. Driving a car, washing clothes, they're skills. We learn some of these almost automatically through daily contact in our homes. Wholesomeness is learned through education and environment, but it's never perfected unless we make a deliberate attempt at it. It doesn't just come to us naturally. We all have some of it. We wouldn't be here if we didn't. The karma of wholesomeness has brought us here, but we also have the opposite karma. The Buddha gives exact instructions in the loving-kindness discourse on how to perfect wholesomeness. It's a short discourse, starting out with the most mundane, worldly instructions and goes all the way to full enlightenment. This is called a graduated discourse. The Buddha's discourses are often like that. Everyone listening, whether at the very beginning of practice or coming to the end of it, can benefit. Those who can absorb what they hear might be able to use the whole discourse to go from worldly conditions to the supermundane. The Buddha said that his teaching was like an ocean. When we approach it from the shore, it's shallow at first. We can just wet our feet. As we go into it deeper and deeper, we are eventually engulfed and finally totally swallowed by it. Just so is the teaching. We start out just wetting our big toe to see what the temperature is. Maybe trying meditation for half a day, then 2 days, until we finally have the courage to come to a 10-day meditation course and sit through all of it. We learn the teaching little by little until eventually our whole life is dominated by it. The next line says, "To gain the state of peacefulness is this." It says clearly that peacefulness is not something given to us. We have to gain it. It's not ours just because we like it, or are wishing for it, or because it's desirable. We have to gain it through effort. No gain comes unless effort is made. The Buddha goes on to say what conditions in oneself are necessary in order to become skilled in wholesomeness and to reach the state of peacefulness. These two are foundations for what is uppermost in this discourse, namely how one should approach other people. First, one has to do something about oneself. It's no use thinking or saying, love, 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 but doing nothing about one's own purification. There are 15 conditions stated by the Buddha that are to be perfected in oneself in order to have love toward the people around one and the world at large. They start out with, one should be able. One should have abilities and not have to depend upon others, but rely on oneself. Self-reliance brings self-confidence, and self-confidence brings a feeling of security. Only when we feel secure can we love. As long as we are dependent upon others, upon their help, assistance, and goodwill, in order to stay alive and perform the most necessary daily tasks, we are full of fear that those others may leave us. Fear cannot possibly arouse peacefulness. All of us are interdependent, but the fear of being left, of not being able to look after ourselves, is an entirely different situation. It can become so fearful that we comply with quite unworthy conditions just in order to keep things running as they are, because we feel so insecure. That is not conducive to peace. One should be upright. A person who is upright not only speaks the truth, which is basic, but also doesn't manipulate people or situations for personal gain. Uprightness is being totally honest, which means expressing ourselves according to our own understanding and not to please others. Uprightness means that we care about truthfulness. The Buddha's teaching is centered in the Four Noble Truths. If we know ourselves to be upright, we are certain not to deviate from the way we feel and understand. We know we are being true to ourselves. Without that, there can be no peace. The next condition is to be straight, which means to be straightforward, not beating around the bush, not whitewashing, not flattering. It needs a straight mind. A person who doesn't have a mind that can think straight will have a hard time being straight. It's a skill and needs to be cultivated through mindfulness of mental formations. To know someone to be straightforward makes it easy to relate to that person. We know they mean what they say. We don't have to wonder, do they really mean it? What could they mean by that? We can trust such a person. To be trustworthy is conducive of having peaceful relationships. If people were to trust each other more and were worthy of that trust, there would be so much less confusion in people's relationships. And not proud. Pride goes before a fall is an English proverb. To be proud is ego-centered nonsense, be it family status or possessions, achievements, accomplishments, or looks. It's all ego affirmation, but it even goes further than that. Pride creates a feeling of superiority and also stiffens the mind. There is a story of a Brahmin in the Buddha's time whose nickname was Pride Stiff because he would never prostrate in front of anyone, not even in front of his own gods, nor in front of any of his teachers. He never came to listen to the Buddha either, but one day he did appear to everyone's surprise. He listened to the Buddha's discourse, and when the Buddha was finished, he went up to him and prostrated. The whole assembly went, "Ah." Then he made an agreement with the Buddha. He said that after having heard his discourse, he wanted to become his disciple, except that he had a reputation to uphold. In the future, whenever he met the Buddha in the street, would the Buddha accept his lifting his hat instead of prostrating as a proper salutation? The Buddha agreed to that. He kept his nickname Pride Stiff until the end of his life. Stiff with pride is the way we express it. The stiffness shows in an inability to accept new ideas and outlooks. Pride is a viewpoint, and anything new would endanger the foundation on which the pride rests. It's very difficult for a proud person to learn something new. It's common for such a person to say, "I know," without knowing. Easy to speak to. A person who is easy to speak to is one who doesn't resort to anger, rage, or fury at the slightest provocation. Someone who is interested in what others are saying and who's able to listen. Listening is an art which most people haven't developed. To be easy to speak to facilitates good relationships with other people. Others can be sure that one will be sympathetic, will listen, will not blame, and will try to be helpful. Easy to speak to doesn't mean idle chatter. Talking for talking's sake. It means being someone worthwhile to talk to, having developed compassion in one's heart. Without compassion, one doesn't become easy to speak to because one is continually thinking about oneself rather than about the other person. All these skills are needed before there's even any mention of loving anybody. The discourse doesn't get to the word love until all the necessary conditions for it have been made clear. The Buddha used a simile indicative of various types of people. He compared those who were listening to him to 4 different kinds of clay pot. The first kind has holes in the bottom. One pours the water in, and it runs out. What is heard is immediately forgotten. The second one has cracks. After the water is poured in, it seeps out. By the time one gets up from one's seat and out the door, all is forgotten. The third kind is full to the brim. Those are the people who say, "I know." They either don't listen at all, or what they hear makes no impact. One can pour anything in. They are full of their own knowledge and viewpoints. Then there is the clay pot without holes and cracks, totally empty. One can pour clean new water in it, and it will remain and be refreshing and uplifting to all who drink it. The next condition is mild. Mild is the opposite of aggressive. A mild person has cultivated his or her heart to the extent where he or she sees the fault in him or herself rather than the fault in others. Seeing the fault in oneself has benefits because one can do something about it. Seeing the faults in others is useless. Usually one just starts disliking the other. Disliking, becoming unfriendly, arguing, or trying to convince are all useless. A person who is mild is an introspective person who checks him or herself with mindfulness. Well content. A person who's contented is a person at ease. We need to be contented with our situation, our associates, our income, our looks, and our knowledge. It doesn't mean we become complacent. Contentment and complacency are not identical. Complacency says, "I'm all right, I'm fine, I've done all I can." Contentment says, "The way things are provides the conditions for my growth." Contentment is essential for peace. Discontent creates all the turmoil in the heart and in the world. Discontent makes us do the most absurd things in order to change what we believe is to be the cause. We believe to be the cause. We argue, we try to change the people we live with or the country we live in, the food or the ideology, or maybe even the religion. Why all that? Because we are not content. Such actions will never bring contentment. The only way contentment will come about is when we change ourselves. That cannot be done with discontent. It can only be done through patient and persevering effort and a bit of insight thrown in. Without insight, nothing much really happens. Easily satisfied. To be easily satisfied means that we don't have many personal requirements. Not because we suppress them, but because we have seen that they don't make us happy. We don't hanker after new and different clothes, furnishings, food, or other material objects. That creates contentment because we are satisfied with whatever we have. We understand that no matter what we buy or get, it's all going to get old and torn and will have to be thrown away in the end. And it has nothing to do with contentment in the mind. There are basic requirements to living without great hardship, but we don't need such a proliferation of different shapes, colors, and sizes in order to live contentedly. Desire is painful because it points out a lack. If we are easily satisfied, we let go of desire because we know that we want to let go of pain, of dukkha. If we get what we want, we get momentary gratification. If we can't get it, then we get frustrated, and the desire is resurrected later. It's a never-ending vicious circle, not conducive to peacefulness. Before there can be an idea of true lovingness, we have to let go of some desires, so that the ego is not always at the center of all of our thinking. And not caught up in too much bustle. If we have no time for introspection, for self-inquiry, we are hardly likely to make any changes. If we are on committees and visit neighbors and relatives, or if we create hustle and bustle around ourselves without having some time every day in which to meditate and contemplate, we cannot attain peacefulness. We need time to create a peaceful situation around and inside ourselves. And frugal in one's ways. Frugality is a virtue. It connotes respect for the work done by someone and respect for their efforts. We don't just throw away their creation at the first sign of deterioration. It also means being satisfied with little and not always trying to have the best. There's usually something better yet available. There's always a bigger television set, a larger refrigerator, a newer car, a bigger house, not to mention all the other possibilities. There's no end to them. To use our life to attain them is a waste of time. It's a waste of a good human life. Frugality means that we can be satisfied with as little as possible, not trying for as much as possible. There is a limit to how little we can get away with, but there's no limit to how much we can desire. Our desires have led us as far as the moon. What else is there to say? Who needs the moon? We can inquire into this and try to make our lifestyle frugal, because that again brings peacefulness. With senses calmed. The calming of the senses is one of the important injunctions of the Buddha. Our senses are constantly leading us astray. We see something we like and we want it, even if it's only a flower. Seeing something beautiful leads people astray into the absurd activity of plucking and thereby killing flowers, which can no longer give anyone pleasure. By being aware, we can learn to realize that hearing is just hearing and seeing is just seeing. Hearing is only sound, seeing is only sight. The mind creates all the ideas around our sense contacts, such as, this is beautiful and I want it. This is ugly and I don't ever want to see or hear it again. Our senses are in a constant touch with the world. We don't want to be blind and deaf and to have no sense of taste or touch or smell. Life would be extremely difficult in such a case, but the senses create a world of illusion for us. They are magicians because upon contact they immediately induce the mind to create repercussions. We need to guard our sense doors so that, while being aware of sights and sounds and touch and smell, we neither crave nor reject them. This is difficult to do, but a very important aspect of leaving suffering behind. In the Buddha's time, there was a religious teacher of many years standing called Bahia, like Salvador Bahia. Bahia. Having been a devout and respected teacher for many years, he had gotten the idea that he was enlightened. For a long time, he hadn't had any strong desires or any anger. One night, a deva, a god, appeared to him. The deva said, "Bahia, you are not enlightened. You don't even know the way to enlightenment." Bahia got quite upset. And at that he said, "What? I don't know the way to enlightenment? Well, who does? Quickly, tell me." The deva replied, "The Buddha knows the way to enlightenment. Go and see him." Bahia inquired where the Buddha was. The deva explained, and in the middle of the night, Bahia got up and started walking to find the Buddha. He arrived in the morning, found the house where the Buddha was staying, but the people said, "We're sorry. You can't ask the Buddha anything right now. He's gone on an alms round." Bahia said, "I'll go and find him." The people said, No, don't go. He doesn't answer questions when he's on the alms round." But Bahia was not to be deterred. He was very anxious to find out how to become enlightened. He ran after the Buddha and found him in the street, walking on alms rounds. He prostrated and said, "Sir, I want to ask you a question." The Buddha said, "Bahia, you've come at the wrong time." Bahia asked again, and again he got the answer, "You've come at the wrong time." And he asked a third time, and the Buddha said, "All right, Bahia, what do you want to know?" And Bahia said, "I want to know how to become enlightened." The Buddha replied thus, "To you, Bahia, the seen is only the seen. The heard is only the heard. The cognized is only the cognized." Bahia thanked him and walked away. In the afternoon, when the Buddha was walking with the monks, they found Bahia dead on the sidewalk. He had been killed by a runaway calf. The Buddha said, "Bahia became enlightened before his death." Bahia had been practicing for 30 years, and surely in other lives before that, and could immediately understand what the Buddha meant with the instructions he gave. When we see something, there is only seeing. But we usually invent a story about the person or the object, or thereby either desire or dislike arises. The same goes for our other senses, including cognizing, the thinking process. All sense contacts are comically neutral, including the thinking process, unless we start liking, desiring, disliking, or rejecting. Bahia understood this. Now maybe we can understand and also practice. It's possible to do so under any circumstances. When somebody coughs, when the door bangs, when the dogs bark, when there is movement. These are occasions to practice hearing only sound. When one sees a beautiful flower, just seeing without saying, "I'm going to plant this in my garden," or "Let me have it, I'll put it in a vase." Just seeing and recognizing the thought process that follows the sense contact. It is said about the arahants that calming their senses and letting go of desire gives them every power. This is power over oneself, where there's nothing to gain and nothing to lose. Calming the senses doesn't mean not using the senses, neither does it mean suppressing desire. It means recognizing the senses through insight for what they really are. When there is pain in the leg, for instance, know it is touch contact. From contact comes feeling, in this case unpleasant feeling. From feeling comes perception. This is pain. From perception comes the mental formation of, "I don't like it. I've got to move. I've got to get away from this." Just as we want to escape from unpleasant sights or sounds, here we want to escape from an unpleasant feeling. This practice then means being aware and stopping the habitual reaction. As we calm our senses, our desires will lessen, and with that, some peacefulness will arise. Desires create restlessness and turmoil in the heart. The stronger the desire, the stronger the turmoil, especially if desire can't be gratified. Not getting what one wants is suffering. Calming the senses leads to peace. intelligent. It's interesting that intelligence should be one of the 15 conditions, because we often think people are either born with intelligence or without it. Obviously, that's not so. If anyone lies in bed for 3 months, they have to learn to walk again. If we don't use our minds, we have to learn to think. Intelligence must and can be cultivated by training the mind through meditation. If we don't meditate, it is very difficult to still the mind. The untrained mind goes wherever it wants, from happiness to unhappiness, from worry to fear, from elation to depression, from wanting to rejection. A mind trained in meditation can use its inherent capacity to think to the best advantage. It takes intelligence to understand the Buddha's teaching. An intelligent mind is an agile mind that can move, but with direction. It moves where it wants to go and can also expand. It isn't narrowly focused on its old and tired habits, customs, and traditions. It's expandable. Not bold. The Buddha gave an interesting simile about men and women. He said, men are like cows strutting around, looking for their own advantage, and women are like creepers, trying to find a tree for support. Both have to get rid of those qualities. The crow is an example of boldness. At our nunnery, the crows steal the cat's food. That's bold, isn't it? They go right into the hallway and take the food from under the cat's noses. Boldness is an exhibition of assertiveness. Self-confidence isn't the same as assertiveness. Self-confidence rests within one's own contentment, resulting in feeling secure. Then there's no need for aggressiveness. Nobody likes a person who is bold, asserts himself to the detriment of others like the crow does. But a self-confident person can stand on his or her own feet without fear, sure of his or her abilities and potential. There is no need to make others aware of these facts. That wouldn't bolster one's self-confidence, only one's ego. Unswayed by the emotions of the crowd. If someone gets angry, we don't get angry with them. If someone gets sad, we don't get sad with them. If someone has a poor opinion of another person, we don't agree because it is interesting to talk about such things. We have our emotions under control. When we don't have our feelings of fear under control, we can experience panic. When we don't have our feelings of hate under control, we get riots. When we don't have our own emotions under control, we are swayed by others, which only results in gossip, slander, panic, riots, and war. To be unswayed by the emotions of the crowd, we must be in touch with our own feelings and trust them. We know when they are wholesome or unwholesome. Abstaining from the ways that the wise ones blame. That's the 15th condition, and it means not breaking the 5 precepts. 1. I undertake the way of training to refrain from killing living creatures. 2. I undertake the way of training to refrain from taking what is not given. 3. I undertake the way of training to refrain from wrong conduct as to sex. 4. I undertake the way of training to refrain from false speech. 5. I undertake the way of training to refrain from alcohol and intoxicants. Not killing. Not lying. Wrong conduct as sex. I think that's like sexual abstinence usually it's considered as, but that's a little more complex. Wrong conduct such as sex. False speech is also lying. Oh, taking what is not giving is stealing. I don't really know these. Not killing. Not stealing. Let's say indulgent or abusive sex and things like it, lying, and intoxicants. abstaining from the ways that the wise ones blame. That's the 15th condition and means not breaking the 5 precepts. So abstaining from killing, stealing, lying, sex, and intoxicants. Abstaining from those things. Anybody who has any sense would find breaking any of these precepts blameworthy. Getting angry and furious is also worthy of blame, and it's interesting to note how much people want to get rid of that. Not only because it's a fault, but because it feels terrible. Greed and desire are hardly ever criticized, yet both are equally destructive of spiritual growth. Both are mentioned here as part of the preparatory work toward feeling some real loving kindness towards others. We don't have to go anywhere to ask anyone's opinion. We each have a conscience, which tells us quite clearly what is blameworthy. But we also rationalize. Yes, but I had to do it because... And then we have a list of becauses. Because she's so awful. Because he doesn't let me. Because they always say... We should stop at knowing this is worthy of blame. To know a thought, speech, or action to be unwholesome is enough. Just knowing, because that will deter us from repeating the same act over and over again. We don't have to be upset at ourselves, saying, I'm awful. What is this terrible thing I'm thinking, saying, or doing? That's not loving kindness. We ourselves are also included in loving kindness. There is no rationalization, no justification. Our behavior skills are just not perfected yet, and this gives us something to do, cultivating this skill. These are the 15 conditions which are preliminary factors in cultivating feeling for others. Only in the next stanzas does the Buddha talk about loving other beings. The discourse continues with, and this the thought that one should always hold. May beings all live happily and safely, and may their hearts rejoice within themselves. If we were to hold this thought always, we would never have any negative thoughts for anyone. Then the discourse goes on to list various kinds of beings. Whatever there may be with breath of life, whether they be frail or very strong, without exception, may they be long or short, or middle-sized, or be they big or small, or thick, or visible, or invisible, or whether they dwell far or they dwell near, those that are here, those seeking to exist. Our loving thoughts should go to all beings, whether alive or seeking rebirth, human or animal, whatever size or form, seen or unseen in any realm, excluding none. Our loving thoughts should go to all beings, whether alive or seeking rebirth, human or animal, whatever size or form, seen or unseen, in any realm, excluding none. We can only see animals and people, but that doesn't mean they are the only beings in existence. Just because our eyesight does not allow us to see anything else, doesn't mean there is nothing more. Bees, for existence, can see ultraviolet light, yet we cannot. Dogs can hear sounds so high-pitched that we can't discern them. What may be invisible or inaudible to us still exists. May beings all rejoice within themselves. We think that all beings should live in harmony and happiness. We learn never to harm any of them. which means that we have consideration for others. Harmlessness lies with our intentions. May beings all live happily and safely, and may their hearts rejoice within themselves. If we remember to think in this way, there will be peace and security within ourselves and within those we meet. The next line says, "Let no one bring about another's ruin, and not despise in any way or place." Let no one do anything to hurt another being. Even if an action is despicable, that doesn't mean we despise the person. The action may not have been wholesome, but there is the person's ignorance to be taken into account. If we despise the person, we make bad karma. It's enough that the other person is already doing that. Just as a mother, at the risk of life, loves and protects her child, her only child, so one should cultivate this boundless love to all that live in the whole universe. If we could imagine being everybody's mother, and we may very well have been in past lives, then we might get the right slant on how to approach other people. Everybody, bar none. There are the Buddha's injunctions, and he mentioned them as a direction, as a guideline. Once he also mentioned that if we were to lay the bones of all the fathers and mothers we have had in our lives end to end, we would circle this globe innumerable times. If we've had that many fathers and mothers, we must have had that many children also. If we can think in terms of universality rather than of one's own 2 children at home, then we can expand to the extent where our lovingness reaches out to many. If the whole of humanity are our children, surely we are not going to expect them to all conform to our ideas of what they're going to be and how they're going to behave. They're not all mine. When we think of it in those terms, a bit of the clinging we have for what we consider ours may be diminished. A mother risks her own life to protect her children, the Buddha said. This is the way we need to feel about everybody. That sounds impossible to fulfill, but it really is a guideline to show us what is lacking in our love for others. This becomes very evident when we compare our feelings for our own children with the feelings we have for the neighbor's children down the street. What to say about all the beings in the whole universe? It's not impossible to imagine that one could develop concern, solicitude, lovingness, care for all beings, especially if one can see their suffering situation. The Buddha would sit every morning in meditation, and it is said that he then cast his net of compassion. With his divine eye, clairvoyance, he would catch someone in it who could benefit from his teaching. He would then go to that person and teach them Dhamma. He did this for 45 years, walking long distances to reach people. Such compassion is the compassion of an enlightened one. We can develop this feeling of motherliness towards others when we see their difficulties, just as the Buddha saw them when he threw out his net of compassion. Extending from a consciousness sublime, upward and downward and across the world. Lovingness to all beings extends from a sublime consciousness, from a consciousness that is not imbued with human problems. It's a consciousness elevated through meditation, which brings about a change of awareness. The ordinary consciousness always has some problem that it's chewing on, like a rat gnawing on wood. When it becomes imbued with loving kindness and compassion, it has these 2 states as its focus and lets go of mundane considerations. This kind of consciousness is untroubled. Untroubled, free from hate and enmity. That doesn't mean that the mundane problems have disappeared. They never disappear. If you think back for a moment, can you remember any day in the last 20 years when there wasn't something that needed attending to? An untroubled mind can be free of hate and enmity because an untroubled mind is a happy mind, and a happy mind doesn't hate. And while one stands, and while one walks, and sits, or one lies down, still free from drowsiness, one should be intent on this mindfulness. This is divine abiding here, they say. Whatever position one's in, standing, sitting, walking, or lying down, not falling asleep yet, one cultivates loving kindness, mindful of lovingness like a mother toward all beings. It's limiting for heart and mind to only love 1 or 2 or 3 or even 4 or 5 persons, when there are 4 billion people to be loved. This was in the 70s? I don't know when she... This comes from her talking. This is all transcribed from a talk she gave. And this was back when there were only 4 billion people on the planet. There's over 7 now. When one is a mother or a father, we should not find it too difficult to gauge our feelings towards others because we know what we feel toward our own children. We can also remember how our own mother acted. With these personal experiences as a foundation, we try to extend our love further. This is divine abiding here, they say. Divine life, right here on earth. This creates a feeling of total contentment, security, and peace, and all other wholesome states accompany it. It creates a mind that is quickly concentrated, which is one of the 11 benefits of loving kindness. It's a divine way of living now. We don't have to wait until we reach the Deva realms. But when one lives quite free from any view, is virtuous, with perfect insight won, and greed for sensual desires expelled, one surely comes no more to any womb. This is a description of an arahant. But when one lives quite free from any view, the only right views are the 4 noble truths, which include enlightenment. Viewpoints are always viewpoints, not based on valid experiences. Nazaruddin, a great Sufi sage, once said, "Don't try to become enlightened. Just discard all of your views and opinions." So Sufi. Getting rid of views doesn't mean that we lose our discrimination of what's wholesome and unwholesome in our own actions, but the many viewpoints that people carry around with them keep them in the prison of their own mind states. How they and others should speak, act, and look, what the self and the world are, is virtuous, with perfect insight won. Perfect insight is attained with the perfection of virtue as a foundation. And greed for sensual desires expelled, all sensual desires having been eliminated with nothing desired or desirable there, is no suffering. This is the doorway to Nibbana, the wishless liberation. One surely comes no more to any womb. No rebirth. This discourse goes from the mundane states of being able and upright, straight and not proud, to enlightenment in the brevity of a few verses. We first develop the heart with loving kindness to the point of loving all beings as if we were their mother, enabling us to meditate because loving kindness is one of the 3 pillars of meditation. Because of using this mindfulness at all times, which means being in the here and now, we lose our viewpoints about self, others, the world. Established in virtue, one gains insight and enlightenment follows. A straightforward pathway. No deviations, argumentations, just the doing of it. This is the essence of this well-known discourse, renowned by word, but not so well known by deed. The Buddha gave exact guidelines as to how to purify the heart, how to arrange our life outwardly and inwardly. It's all there for the taking, but nobody can do it for anyone else. You have to do it for yourself. Once there was a man who came to see the Buddha, and he said he would like to ask him a question. He said that he had been listening to the Buddha's discourses for a number of years, and during that time had met many monks and nuns who were disciples of the Buddha. He had come to know quite a few more intimately, and had found that some of them had changed greatly. They had become loving and kind, wise and patient, but others hadn't changed at all. There were even some who had become far more impatient than they used to be, less loving, and some were most unkind. Yet he had met all these monks and nuns listening to the same discourses. He wanted to know why such a thing was possible. The Buddha said to him, "What's your hometown?" And the man said, "I'm from Megara." The Buddha said, "Do you sometimes go back to Megara?" The man replied, "I often go. I have business and family there." The Buddha then inquired, "Do you know the way to Megara?" The man said, "I know it so well I can do it in the dark. I don't even need to see it. I know it that well." The Buddha queried, "And if somebody wanted to know how to get to Megara, could you explain it to them?" The man said, "If you know anybody who wants to go there, you should send them to me, because I can really give exact explanations of how to get there. I've gone that way many times." The Buddha said, "I believe you. But if you were to explain to someone how to get to Ragaha, and then that person were to stay right here in Benares, would it be your fault?" The man said, "Of course not. I'm only the one who shows the way." The Buddha replied, "So am I. I too am only the one who shows the way." All you have heard, written down, or know already are only landmarks, signposts pointing in the right direction. But unless we start moving along that route, we'll remain armchair travelers. The discourse on loving kindness needs to be made real. There are no superfluous words in it. Each is meaningful and directive. The Buddha also said, "If it wasn't possible, O monks, to do only good, I would not ask you to do so." It is possible. He said it is possible to cultivate a mother's love for all beings in one's heart. It is also possible to become enlightened. Otherwise, he wouldn't have urged all his disciples to do so. It is surely possible to have only thoughts of harmlessness and compassion. Thoughts are of primary importance. What kind of thoughts to think is revealed in this discourse. Thinking determines whether we create inner turmoil, heaviness, disruption, or peace and happiness. The discourse starts out with what one should do to gain the state of peacefulness. It isn't something we are doing for others. We are doing it for ourselves, and that's the only real motivation. Rightly so, because we are the only ones who can eventually change ourselves. That others will have the benefit of our love is a secondary consideration. The primary consideration is our own purification, and this should be our priority. First of all, we must establish within ourselves a mind of lovingness and clarity. The two go together because the mind that is loving is a mind that has no turmoil in it. The mind without turmoil is a mind that thinks and speaks clearly. When we establish the intention to purify ourselves, we can use this discourse to great advantage by checking up. What am I doing? Am I following my intentions? That is one way of making sure that we haven't strayed from the path. No need to blame oneself. It is quite possible to alter our thoughts. It's not that difficult. The more we meditate, the easier it is. We gain strength in our minds, which makes it possible to change our thoughts at will. The one who becomes master of his or her thoughts is the one who gains insight. What should be done by one who's skilled in wholesomeness to gain the state of peacefulness is this. One must be able, upright, straight, and not proud, easy to speak to, mild, and well content, easily satisfied, and not caught up in too much bustle, and frugal in one's ways, with senses calmed, intelligent, not bold, not being covetous when with other folk, abstaining from the ways that the wise ones blame. And this the thought that one should always hold. May beings all live happily and safely, and may their hearts rejoice within themselves. Whatever there may be with breath of life, whether they be frail or very strong, without exception, be they short or long, or middle-sized, or be they big or small, or thick or visible, or invisible, or whether they dwell far or they dwell near, those that are here, those that are seeking to exist, may all beings rejoice within themselves. Let no one bring about another's ruin, and not despise any way or place. Let them not wish each other any ill, from provocation or from enmity. Just as a mother at the risk of life loves and protects her child, her only child, so one should cultivate this boundless love to all that live in the whole universe, extending from a consciousness sublime, upward and downward and across the world, untroubled, free from hate and enmity. And while one stands and while one walks and sits, or one lies down, still free from drowsiness, one should be intent on this mindfulness. This is divine abiding here, they say. But when one lives quite free from any view, is virtuous, with perfect insight won, and greed for sensual desires expelled, one surely comes no more to any womb. The Buddha's words, Sutta Nipata.